Welcome to this installment of Princeton Theological Seminary's Future of American Democracy series. My name is Heath Carter, and I'm the Associate Professor of American Christianity here at the seminary. It's my great pleasure to serve as the moderator of this series. Over the course of this year, we're bringing together leaders from across society, government, media, church, and academy to discuss the big questions shaping our civic life together. Today's conversation will focus on whether persuasion is still possible. I'm thrilled to dive into this theme today with New York Times bestselling author Anand Giridharadas. Anand is the author of the international bestseller Winners Take All, The True American and India Calling. A former foreign correspondent and columnist for the New York Times for more than a decade, he's also written for The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and Time, and is the publisher of the newsletter The Ink. He is an on-air political analyst for MSNBC. He's received the Radcliffe Fellowship, the Porchlight Business Book of the Year Award, Harvard University's Outstanding Lifetime Achievement Award for Humanism and Culture, and the New York Public Library's Helen Bernstein Book Award for Excellence in Journalism. He lives in Brooklyn, New York. And his latest best-selling book, which will be at the center of our conversation today, is The Persuaders, at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. If you have questions about or suggestions for the series, please email democracy.panels@ptsim.edu. To keep up to date with the wider conversation I'm convening, check us out at ptsim.edu. Without further ado, welcome, Anand.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, we've been talking all fall about intensifying polarization, the fact that increasingly Americans on all sides of the nation's political divide see folks on the other side as not just wrong on key issues, but as dishonest, as immoral, and as an outright threat to the nation's well-being. So, you know, your book obviously is kind of right on this issue. And in the midst of this deeply polarized season, you have put your finger on something that's sort of worrisome in your own circles and on the left more broadly, this tendency to kind of write off folks who aren't fully on the same page, who aren't already kind of part of the choir, so to speak. So I want to tee up this quote. You write early in the book, "The stakes of this writing off were high. Some of the most dangerous and anti-democratic movements of our time had managed, in spite of those features, to make their causes appear welcoming and make newcomers feel at home, whereas some of the most righteous, inclusive, and just movements gave many the feeling of being inaccessible, intractable, and alienating." Fascinating, really evocative line. Love to hear you talk more about that. What exactly is it that you have in mind when you think about kind of these movements on the left, and what were you noticing that led you to write this book?
Well, thank you for having me. I love that you're doing a series on democracy. It's a great topic while it lasts. Good podcast topic while we still have one. Look, I think at the heart of the idea of democracy is the idea that we attempt to change things by changing each other's mind. For most of human history, that's not how we were governed. We were governed by one guy in the town or the region or the kingdom, making group decisions for everybody. And it was felt that that was better because group decisions are hard. Do you drain the lake or not drain the lake? Do you let those people in from the neighboring village or not? Do you hang the prisoners of war that you captured, or do you show them mercy? These were hard group decisions. Do you have schooling? Do you not have schooling? Do kids learn this or do they learn that? These kind of group decisions were usually just made by one guy. For a community. And in the last few hundred years, we tried a different thing, which is, what if we all just talk to each other 24/7 about everything all the time? And then out of that mess of conversation, produce choices about the future. And when you describe it that way, you can understand how insane a concept it must have sounded like to basically everyone who lived, and most people who lived until, 1700. And then since then, it has been arguably the most successful idea in the history of the world. Certainly an idea that changed the human condition, that defied the skeptics. Democracies make better decisions than non-democracies. They're more peaceful. They take care of the environment more effectively, and have built extraordinary progress for our species in the last few hundred years. And what is so dispiriting and became the seedbed of this book, The Persuaders, is this collapse in recent years due to polarization and other factors of the basic belief at the heart of democracy that it is possible and worthy to change people's minds, that doing so is even something that is worth your time and breath. And I believe that when you abandon the idea of persuasion, you abandon democracy. You are essentially inviting that one guy that we know from history to come back in. You're inviting tyranny. You're inviting political violence, which is we can't agree on what kind of education our kids should get. So I'm going to try to eliminate you from the discussion. The road that begins with writing other citizens off, believing that they can't change their mind or ways, is a road that leads squarely in a dark and violent and tyrannical place. And so I was determined, in the depth of my own despair in this political era, to say, is there another way? Can we get off the Civil War road? Can we persuade again? Can we believe again that people can change and build? Frankly, since we're talking in a theological seminary, like have small e evangelical movements for progress, right? I deeply believe that that progressive forces need to be small e evangelical. They need to want to convert souls. They need to measure themselves by whether they picked up some people on the street today who weren't with them yesterday. And this book is a loving intervention with my own allies to say we have to win by growing. We have to conquer souls, and we have to build movements that are capable of standing bravely for real and ambitious things while also being much better at being magnanimous, open-hearted, reaching out and bringing in people who don't fully get it, aren't fully on board, but might be.
Yeah. I'm so curious. I mean, where do you think folks in your circles who, you're writing to, the kind of primary audience here, who have somewhere along the way given up on, or at least been sort of flagging in their hopes for persuasion, what are they picking up on? Why are people increasingly skeptical, especially in movements that are democratic and justice seeking? Why are they skeptical? Why are they guarded? Why aren't they small e evangelical in the way you hope right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of factors. And what's interesting is it's a mix of good and bad factors, which always makes the problem even harder, right? So I think one that everybody listening to this will think of is social media. I mean, social media is clearly a huge psychological phenomenon of our time. Has changed the way we talk to each other. It's changed the way we think. It's changed the way we react. It's changed the way we advocate. And it has clearly encouraged, in its DNA, is the encouragement of a kind of dunking on people who disagree with you approach, as opposed to luring them in. And the kind of phrases that are now so commonplace on Twitter, like imagine thinking that, whatever, right? Like so much of social media culture is narrating the inability of people who disagree with you to become better. And that's the kind of the cool flex of social media, is to like, imagine, right? And what I think many of us fail to realize is like, what you're really saying is you don't know. You're not good at politics. Like you don't know how to win them over. You're not actually just saying anything about them. You're talking about your own impotence as a persuader when you say, imagine thinking that, instead of, hey, can I give you some arguments for why that thing actually violates your values, not just mine, right? So I think a lot of us end up kind of narrating our own impotence on social media and telling the world why we are actually just not very good at appealing to people on behalf of our values. And it kind of masquerades as a description of other people, but it's not true. It's just empirically not true. I mean, if you're going to stand, who is going to tell me that hearts and minds on homosexuality haven't changed in your and my lifetime? I mean, this is one of the great moral revolutions of our time. And it has happened in our lifetime. It happened through persuasion, through structural change, through activism, through hearts and minds work, through writing, through art, all of the above. And this is an issue that went from the bargain basement in opinion polls to, I mean, Mike Pence probably doesn't want gay people to get married, but does Mike Pence think like there should be no gay people? Right. I don't even think Mike Pence thinks that anymore.
Right.
Yep. Like when's the last time you heard a Republican say like there shouldn't be gay people? Yeah. Because that was a very mainstream opinion in your and my lifetimes. Yeah. That you have to find some really loony people to articulate today, right? Yeah. And so this kind of like, I don't know, French philosopher cigarette pose of like people never change. It's not true. It's just empirically not true. If you don't know how to do the work, get out the way. But it's not true. People have moved on all kinds of things. The kind of confrontation and reckoning with race that white people have lived through in your and my lifetimes. I mean, how many white people's parents or grandparents ever grappled with race in the history of this country? Yeah. Right. In the way that like very normal, non-coastal, middle-class white people at workplaces and academic institutions are totally grappling with it today. Are we there yet? Are we fully? No. Yeah. Right. But is it fair to say this is kind of like the first generation of white people in our history to honestly, earnestly have to account for whiteness and think about it? I would say so. That's big. Yeah. Don't say people's minds don't change. We are on the issue of gender, right? Essentially, the old ways of being a man, even if you are a nice, kind man, were basically inconsistent with the full liberation and flourishing of women. Yeah. Right. The nicest guy in 1950, the least mean, predatory guy, was still socialized in a way that was inconsistent with women living their fullest lives. Yeah. Right. And frankly, with them raising their own boys to live the full extent of who their boys actually were. And let's give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back. We have successfully changed, psychologically migrated tens of millions of men in our society to a new model of masculinity. We're not fully there yet. I don't even know if it's most men, but a whole lot of us are not like our dads and grandfathers in certain ways. As nice as our dads and grandfathers, a whole lot of men are already living in a way that is consistent with the equality of women, that delight in being in partnership with powerful women, have self-images and self-understandings that don't depend on women standing beneath their boot. And so again, don't tell me people don't change. Men have changed enormously, some number of men enormously. So this kind of pose that people don't change, it's false and it's self-defeating and it gets in the way of the real work of democracy. And so this book then pivots to say, okay, then who are the people we should be listening to who know how to change minds? Let's stop listening to those who are kind of, shrugging and saying nothing is possible. Let's listen to those who are doing the work on the ground. And this is a book about activists, organizers, political consultants, politicians, cognitive scientists, and others who are doing it, who are changing minds, who have a formula. And this is a kind of a book about their playbook in a time when the stakes, as you said before, could not be higher.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, so on all of those issues that you just named, where I would agree, I mean, there's been progress and on, maybe different sorts of levels of breakthrough. There's also on each of those issues, I think, folks who would say, as a trans person, I still don't feel safe. And there's lots of reasons to think that they're understandable to feel that way. Lots of folks who would say, look, we have so much work to do, even as white people are grappling with race, we have so much work to do there, so much work to do in terms of gender equality and a wider array there. And so I wonder, I mean, is it partly that I'm trying to think about, because I mean, it's not just that people have given up on persuasion in some corners, but also, I mean, you are sort of writing about the fact that people are even inclined to sort of give folks a hard time who are engaged in that work. I mean, there are people right now who are doing that work, and you're saying that there can be a culture on the left of sort of clapping back or calling out people who are doing that work. Are they compromising? I mean, part of what I wonder about is like in this moment of where we have seen progress in our lifetimes on these different fronts, there is also a sense, I think, of threat. It's certainly been a sense of threat in the last, during the Trump presidency, especially, but even now, midterm elections or tomorrow, what's going to happen, and that those things are in some sense endangered, that the progress can't be presumed. It's not going to just keep moving in one positive direction. I mean, is that part of where the like kind of low view of the possibilities for persuasion comes from, is a sense of we've got to protect ourselves, we've got to kind of like defend the gains that we've made? I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine.
Yeah.
You've made a good point, right? That in 2008, Barack Obama was not publicly on the record in favor of gay marriage. And then in his administration, you see the beginning of just a sea change on that issue. So you would think, right, with that in our immediate rear view mirrors, that people would be more positive. So I'm just trying to understand, like, where would that come from?
You know, I have a lot of love for the kind of activists and organizers I write about in the book who understandably, by orientation, are focused on what has yet to be achieved. That's their job.
Yeah.
You know, their job is to focus on the gap. And so, yeah, it's really dangerous to be trans right now in a country where this backlash is happening. It's, you know, when activists are focused on, you know, police officers not, you know, doing cowardly shootings of unarmed Black men, you know, for the crime of walking in the street, it's understandable to be really focused on all that needs to be done to get there. I think what I say to many of my own friends in these spaces is, like, take a second to congratulate yourself sometimes. Like, buy yourself an ice cream every now and then, because like you are moving the conversation, and by orientation, you're never going to be satisfied. And that's good. You shouldn't be. Like, that's the work, right? And we have climate, and we have like a bunch of problems. But I think sometimes there is a confusion of the fascist uprising that we're seeing on the right now, a confusion of it as a brave movement of the future, as a kind of bold thinking movement of the future, when in fact, it's a pretty standard reactionary movement that exists in reaction to us and to the progress we are making. I just want to be very clear that, like, I don't live in the world that they are trying to create. They live in the world that I and my allies are trying to create. Their movement, like our movement and cause, would exist without Trump and Trumpism. The desire to have this kind of liberty and justice for all, freedoms for the body, for the freedom to thrive, freedom to vote. These would be the program that I'm for if Donald Trump didn't exist. But their program would not exist if we hadn't made significant progress on racial and gender inclusion in recent years. Their movement is a barnacle on progress the political left has made to extend the blessings of liberty to more people, to be truer to the founding ideals of this country. There is no Trumpism without the progress we have made. So it makes no sense not to tout it. It makes no sense. Trump's not going to tout it. They're not going to tout it, but they have no existence without it. Their whole movement is a movement of reaction to what organizers and activists have achieved. And so while I get this notion of never being satisfied and always wanting more, it's worth just centering the people who've actually created the era we're living in, that has created in turn this backlash, that is a backlash, that is a barnacle. And I really believe, if you take the long view of history, right, this faction, small-hearted faction, is an old phenomenon in American history. It's like it's like a river, that old philosophical thing when you stare at a river, like you may the same water particle may never show up again in that river, right? But it's the same river. This small-hearted faction in American life that prefers to break the republic than share it, that prefers to suppress people's vote instead of asking for votes. The bodies in the movement, voting in the voting booths, the bodies have changed. The bodies change every generation. But you and I know that river. That's an old river in this country, right? And so let's just talk about the record of that river, as I'm sure many of the beautiful books behind you attest. Let's talk about the record of that river. That small-hearted faction that would rather burn this country's institutions down than share them, it opposed the abolition of slavery. The small-hearted faction opposed labor reforms in the Industrial Revolution when inequality was starting to rise and urban factory workers and others needed protection. It opposed women's suffrage. The small-hearted faction opposed the New Deal. It opposed Social Security. It opposed unions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The small-hearted faction opposed help for farmers in that time. It opposed rural electrification. The small-hearted faction opposed racial integration and the end of Jim Crow. The small-hearted faction opposed opening immigration in 1965 to people from all over the world, not just white countries. The small-hearted faction opposed every feminist reform since in the modern era. The small-hearted faction opposed gay rights as opposed trans rights. What is their record in the long run?
Yeah.
I feel sad for them, even though I oppose them with every fiber of my being. Like they haven't even won once. Like they've won short-term tactical victories, but they have lost every single battle about extending the blessings of American liberty more broadly or tightening the grip. They've lost they've never, ever won in the long view. I find it hard to believe that right now they're on the verge of their first victory.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out how to put down that revolt against the future. But I believe the future will prevail. And I believe there are ways, these persuaders show, to do just that.
I mean, I think it's really, so listening to you there, that's a fascinating way to narrate American history. And so that's my field in part. And I think there are certain folks in my field today who I think largely would agree with you and would narrate American history that way. And then there's another set, and I think, in the last 5+ years, and especially galvanized in part in response to the 1619 Project and whatnot, I think there's been a set of American historians who've wanted to say, well, wait a minute, maybe actually the folks who have been fighting those rearguard battles have done better than, and maybe there is something deeper here. So, I mean, I think about, I think about in the wake of the Civil War and Reconstruction and the kind of revolution and the multicultural democracy that starts to emerge in the South as Black freed people are founding, independent churches and independent chapters of the Republican Party at that point, the party of Abraham Lincoln and whatnot, and building a multicultural society. The South Carolina state legislature is majority Black men in the 1860s. You have a Black senator from Mississippi, governor in Louisiana, and that the folks who fought that rearguard battle actually were relatively successful for 100 years, and that in some strong important sense, right, that the currents of the kind of broad American life allowed their triumph. Now you get another uprising, and the battle never stops, and there's another kind of breakthrough 100 years later. And there's a way of narrating this last generation that, I think has been certainly important in my field, that sort of says, hey, part of what we're living through is the impact of the largest, most powerful grassroots movement since civil rights is a movement that partly rose up as a backlash and that sought to drown the federal government in a bathtub. And that, the moment that the kind of federal largesse becomes available, not just to white working class people, but to a broader array of Americans, it became, it was in the center of the target, right? And that in some sense, the energy, not just behind Trumpism, but, going back to Goldwater and then through Nixon to Reagan, and that it really actually has more deeply shaped. What do you think about that? I mean,
I think, look, I don't think we're disagreeing. I think what I'm suggesting is those are all movements of backlash, and those movements of backlash can have years. They can have decades, right? My only point is, in the long arc of American history, the general pattern is people having more rights, more groups being included, and, the people who want to restrict and narrow who is covered by the founding words generally lose. Now, do they have good decades? Absolutely. Do they have good, but I think it's still better to be an African-American person in 1970 than 1870. But there's a lot of choppiness in between, for sure. I think the way I read the 1619 Project is precisely in terms of what I'm saying, that you have this very, very difficult beginning and very hypocritical beginning where beautiful words are written, iconic words are written, and no one has the bravery to live up to them in the power establishment of this country. And then marginalized people living with this relationship of unrequited love for the country. They love the country won't love them back. Make America again. Make it the country, as Langston Hughes said, it could be, but it hasn't ever been yet.
Yeah.
And that to me, like what Nicole Hannah-Jones described so powerfully in the 1619 thesis is what I'm talking about when I say at the end of the day, it's not flowing in the direction, starting with 2022, going to like there is a directionality to it, right? With each generation, marginalized people have made America more true to those words, not less. Yeah. But are there big periods of retrenchment? Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's what I think the choice is now, right? Is this a 5-10 year backlash or is this a 70-year backlash? Yeah. And I agree with you. This could very well be a 70-year backlash, right? Yeah. I still think they'll lose in the end. I think our choice is about right now, whether this is a revolt against the future that gets put down within a decade through really out-organizing this fascist uprising, or whether this is, they carry the day, they sabotage elections. And if they win in these midterms and win in 2024 through cheating, look, I think that kind of post-Reconstruction thing you're talking about could well be the future, and it may be 50 years. I don't think they will always prevail, but yes, I think whether this is 5 years or 50 years is very much in play.
I mean, one of the things I hear you as you're talking and in the book too is a kind of faith in the American project at some level and what is possible, and also a kind of value for the importance of institutions. I mean, in your writing about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think one of the things I take it you admire about her, and that I've often been struck by, so interesting. I mean, younger generations we know are faltering in their kind of faith in institutions, and for understandable reasons. And we know that many of our institutions have not served us well in recent years. But it's striking to me, part of the things that AOC has done so well, I mean, she is galvanizing reform and action within one of the oldest institutions in the nation, and in some sense playing that inside-outside game that you talk about in the book, where not just sort of rejecting the importance of institutions and kind of building the future we're going to build, but also recognizing that you need to have you need the grassroots activism, you need the folks on the ground who are building the leverage and the momentum to create the future that institutions should be living into. I mean, does that seem right? Sort of a confidence or a kind of insistence that we continue to do hard work of turning institutions in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, the person who actually really talked about this so clearly, besides AOC, I talked to AOC extensively for the book, but also Alicia Garza. Yeah. And she described a kind of attitude within a lot of her own activist spaces. Alicia, of course, one of the progenitors of Black Lives Matter movement. And Alicia talks about this kind of attitude she's encountered in some of her own spaces, where people are like, screw establishment power, screw Congress, like powers to the people in the streets, blah, blah, blah. And look, Alicia believes in that kind of power to the people on the streets as much as the next person. You can't outflank her in your belief that protest matters, that the people on the street matter. However, she says very clearly, and I deeply agree with this, like, if you want to know where real power is, it's kind of in the obvious places. Yeah. Like, sorry, like it's kind of with Congress and state governments, and like maybe it ought not be that way, right? But like from a very practical point of view, and these are like all practical idealists I'm writing about in this book in certain ways, like getting 20 members of Congress to view the issue of police killing Black people in a different way can have more effect on Black lives than a lot of different things that may happen in public life. It doesn't mean protest is not important. Protest is how you get to the condition where you might be able to move those people. But I think it's also true that hanging inside the halls of power and hoping to change things and having no connection to the outside doesn't work either. So I think what a lot of the people I'm writing about are doing are that inside outside game. I think this is actually, I'm glad you picked up on that I think it's a theme of the book. AOC personifies that, right? Waleed Shahid, one of the people allied with that movement in the communications arena, says her career is a test of whether you can kind of have this one foot in the movement and 1 foot in the halls of power. By the way, I don't know that it's resolved. I don't know the test has been answered. What she's trying to do is very hard. It is easy to work the inside wings of the establishment. It's also easy to be on the street and be accountable to no one and just yell things. And people who are trying to be part activist, part base building organizer, part like community, like creator of consensus, part media worker, part like conversation shifter, and person who introduces bills in Congress, serves on presidential task forces, and occupies Nancy Pelosi's office.
Right.
AOC, the marvel of AOC is, as I put it in Gen Z speak, I mean, her insistence on trying to be all the things. She's trying to be all the things. And in political philosophy, it's a political strategy. It is incredibly hard. It is something that results in having, I think, admiration from across the board, but also like very few people in any of those worlds actually deeply having her back. It is incredibly complicated to try to be all. But she also, as I write in the book, had a lot of practice being all the things from her youth, from straddling worlds as a child. And so she is someone who, as much as anybody I've met in reporting on the book, has that power to try to test that inside-outside game.
Yeah, doing all the things and doing them so publicly. And so, I mean, that to me is the high wire act of doing all, I mean, it's just incredible to be able to do all those things in the first place, but then to be able to pull it off in public in the way that she does, it's just sort of, it's wild to me. One of the things that I really enjoyed the cast of characters and hope lots of folks listening will read the book and meet the different folks that you spoke with, who are, I mean, interestingly, I think sometimes people think about people who talk about polarization or whatnot are really just calling us towards some kind of bland centrism, but that's not the case. With the folks that you're talking to are folks who have a real clear commitment to a progressive social justice vision for the future. I mean, one of the things that I was struck by, and that I think actually different folks that you spoke with and that you report on in the book maybe have slightly different views about, but I'd love to hear you think about this, is, how many people, how wide of an array of folks actually are persuadable? I found, is it that almost everybody is persuadable? Is it that there's some smaller but still significant and important for, the future group of folks that's persuadable? You have this really interesting set of questions at one point in the book that you sort of tee up in thinking through some of the folks that you've been talking to. You say, in the movement to end oppression, is there space for imperfect allies? How imperfect is too imperfect? Such an important question. And then another really important question: do people who are part of the problem have a place in the search for solutions? So really interested in, how, as you've talked to all these folks, what's your sense? I mean, what percentage, let's say, of Americans are in this persuadable category that we should really devote the kind of time that I take it you're calling us to devote to really trying to win their hearts and minds in that small evangelical way?
All right, it's a great question. And I think it's very important. This is not a kumbaya book, and I'm not a kumbaya person, so like in this moment in this country, there are some people who are, let's say 15, 20% of voters who are deeply militantly committed to what is now essentially a kind of fascist offering from the modern, Trump hijacked Republican Party. And I think one should spend zero time trying to persuade any of them, right? The same way there's frankly a 20% hardcore progressive base that the Republican Party is going to have no luck with, right? And what defines these kind of 20% as people in politics that I spoke to think about is not the depth of their, not how strong their opinion is, because a lot of other people have strong opinions too. It's kind of the depth of the opinion, the rootedness of the opinion, which is different from the strength of the opinion, right? I may yell at you about a strong border. If we don't have a border, we don't have a country. I may yell at you, right? But if someone, who like you is sitting in front of a whole bunch of books that have buttressed that worldview, that have reinforced it, someone who has worked on that issue, or someone who has gone on a YouTube rabbit hole on that issue, they're not going to be chatted out of that stand. They're probably in that 20%, right? I would imagine, given all the books behind you, you're probably in whatever 20% you are in that. You're not going to be, you're not going to have a couple beers and lose your worldview.
Yeah.
Okay? But then there is another group that the people I'm talking to in the organizing world, messaging world think about, that kind of 60% in the middle. Look, it may be 50 and maybe 40. These people are not all swing voters in the sense they're not all moving together. In a polarized time, most of them are quite affiliated with one side or another. However, they are more likely to have, what is sometimes called strong opinions lightly held, which is to say, on the surface, they may look like a tree, just like the other person, but the roots are not that deep, right? These are the people who are kind of voting on vibes. These are the people who are going with a charismatic leader or a demagogue, right? By the way, these are white racists who voted for Barack Obama, not because their racism went away, but because they like Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And, political scientists were the last to understand this. Like, he's a really handsome, charismatic, inspiring guy. And like, people are complicated, and it is totally possible to be a profound racist and be like, I like that handsome guy, right? Like, and I think a lot more voters than we'd like to think, because we think everyone's smart and we're smart. And like, a lot of people just thought he was a really great guy. That's it.
Yeah.
Right. And we're totally willing to kind of retain their racist commitments. Similarly, a lot of people generally like economic justice and feeling like, they should be fought for in terms of healthcare and this and that. But they thought Donald Trump was going to shake up a system that needed shaking up. That's voting on vibes, I think there's a lot more voting on vibes than we would like to acknowledge. I think, one of the things I learned from Anat Shenker-Osorio, messaging consultant I write about, this is my framing, not hers, but I think this is sort of what she taught me, is that like the selection for that middle group that's not on those 20% deeply steeped worldview polls, the selection of views on issues is more similar to how we choose pants than how we kind of write a 5-paragraph essay, in the sense that it's not a reasoning evidence process. Like, when you buy pants, what you're basically doing generally is like, what's everyone else doing on pants these days? Are we going wide? Are we going narrow? Or is Gen Z the only ones not doing skinny anymore? Is everyone not doing skinny anymore? Are we cuffing? Are we not cuffing? Right? Yeah. Like, you've never bought pants from any kind of analysis of anything. You've never looked up, an analysis of like your height and weight and body shape, and therefore what kind of pants. Like, no one buys pants. Like, it's not a cognitive evidence data thing. You're going on vibes. You're going on like what you feel is sort of happening. Yeah. Right. And I think that's how a lot of people, what I learned from the Persuaders, that's how a lot of people come to their view of immigration. And the evidence for that is, by the way, when a lot of people in that middle group, who Anat Shenker-Osorio says can be toggled into a very progressive understanding of the world, or can be toggled into a very conservative understanding of the world. When people in that group see pictures on television nonstop of asylum seekers at the border, they quickly toggle, as we know, into a very right-wing, pro-border stance. But do you remember a few years ago when the images on TV were actually of families being separated at the border? And do you remember how many normie, moderate people toggled the other way? Yeah, we're appalled by that, right? This is not who we are. You remember that phrase, this is not who we are, right? They weren't saying they wanted open borders. They weren't saying that, right? This is not, you crossed their line when you did that. This is not who we are. That was a big moment. Yeah. Right. For those of us who want a more humane immigration system. It's the same people who can be pushed this way or that way, right? Same people who can think Donald Trump's going to smash the system and Barack Obama is going to smash the system, right? And often we sneer at that, those of us who read a lot of books and have more deeply steeped worldviews. And the biggest thing I learned from so many of these persuaders is if you're focused on that group, which does include a lot of persuadable people. And remember, in America, 3, 5, 6, 7% of those people changing their mind in a given year is the difference between very different futures for your children, right? Those people do change their mind. And what you need to do, if the pants theory is correct, is not dilute your stances to appeal to as many people as possible in this kind of please all, please none way of the old Aesop's fable, but in fact, to make people think that the kind of pants you're selling are the pants everybody's wearing, to make your view normative in the society, right? To not allow your party, your cause to be branded as out of sync or out of touch where people are. And so I think it's incredibly important for pro-democracy forces to saturate and encircle the culture with messages that tell people, this is what we're doing now. This is who we are. And to properly marginalize the political right as the extremists they are.
I mean, part of what I hear you doing here is it's sort of a hopeful take on other people, and a take, people are complex, people are on a journey, and sometimes we forget that when we encounter someone who yells the strong view that they have in their minds at that moment, maybe for the reasons you said, right? That people often haven't read 6 books about the thing that they hold very strongly, but it's for whatever reason, it's a view that they've come to hold for some complex set of reasons that we may or may not know when we encounter that view. And so, part of what I hear you saying is for folks on the left, just folks who love democracy, to be ambitious in imagining who might be persuadable. And then and I think part of the upshot of that is, to the extent that we can keep our circles broader, we should. That, we should reach beyond kind of the folks that already agree with us. One of the things that, and I encounter this here, talking to students about these kinds of questions. One concern that I think is a real one, and I wonder what you think about it, is, especially if you're a person who feels like, in our society, your dignity, your safety are not guaranteed, depending on where you live, depending on, who you encounter, that it can feel like genuinely either psychologically and emotionally, or maybe even physically dangerous to keep your circles broad. That part of, in this polarized moment, what it feels like is that, that going and having that conversation with that person who's in the 60% who may be persuadable, but how are they going to respond to you? I was really struck by the work of Lucha, this organization you talk about in Arizona, who's doing this deep canvassing work, which I do think it's exactly this thing, right? It's very hopeful. It's we're going to spend up to 30 minutes at talking to folks and trying to kind of destabilize their ideas that they already have, in the hopes that down the road, maybe they would come to take up new ideas. But I can only imagine if you're a person doing that work, right, and knocking on those doors, and you're gay or you're Black, or you have an identity that in some way will be apparent to the person on the other side. And how do you think about kind of the reality of harm and the reality of we live in a society where people's safety and dignity is violated? How do you think about that piece?
Such a great question. This is a book, I should say, I don't make a big song and dance of it, but this is a book largely about women who are doing incredible work of persuasion. A lot of women of color in particular are at the heart of this book. And one of the things they all say in different ways is, in no way is what I or they are advocating for that everyone do this work, or that anyone in particular do anything. This is all, they all say in different ways, about doing the work that you want to do. We don't need most people going door to door canvassing. We need a lot of people doing that. But practically, we need a small minority of us to be doing the kind of work that I'm talking about. And so, Loretta Ross says it very well. Black woman activist in her 70s who's led a lot of these fights. Do the work that works for you. She said a lot of Black people are not in a position where they're going to want to go talk to white racists, and they shouldn't. There's no moral obligation to do it. There's no practical value in it for them. Don't do it. On the other hand, she likes doing that work. She grew up partly in mixed communities. She feels she's in a healed enough space to do that work. She likes to do that work. She was a rape victim. She got an opportunity to work with male rapists in prison to try to educate them and make them rape less. And she said, most people may not want to do this, but I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna give it a shot. And she ended up being glad that she did. Do the work that works for you. I want to be very clear in this book. The Persuaders is not an argument that anyone has to do persuasion, that anyone has to do anything. But there are some people in the gay community who, after the 2008 defeat of gay marriage in California, wanted to go talk to homophobic straight people and move them. And I'm very glad that that small minority of gay people wanted to do that work, felt healed enough and strong enough and safe enough to do it. I don't know that I would do it. They wanted to do it. Again, I don't think any people of color have any obligation to go talk white people through their racism. However, I think it is my view that if no people of color are willing to do that work, I don't know that white people talking to white people alone
Mm-hmm.
is going to organize this country into the future we want. And fortunately, there's a ton of people of color who want to do that work. If you're watching this thinking, that's not for me, honestly, that's great.
Yeah.
Do whatever the work is that works for you.
And and part of one of the emphases of the book is, that not everybody has to do this work, but that let the people who want to do it, because it can have a really positive impact.
The worst thing to do is to not do the work and try to suffocate the people in your spaces who are brave enough to go do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah.
And I think we need more of an orchestra principle. I'm going to be over here playing the cello, but I'm not going to insult you for playing the bassoon.
Right. I wonder about, so this is, I mean, that's I think that's really helpful and a great response there. I wonder about at an institutional level. So, I mean, sometimes, it's one thing, people can, as individuals, opt in and out. But one of the things about democratic life, right, is that we're part of institutions. I mean, obviously the big one being federal government, but then lots of other institutions, including small ones in our community, that historically have been places where people would, encounter folks who voted differently. I mean, mainline churches were places where Republicans and Democrats once sat in pews, down the pew from one another or whatever. And that's, I think, if I understand it correctly, I mean, that's less and less the case as we live in a society where people are literally moving further away from folks that disagree with them. But I wonder, I mean, do you think, for institutions, I think it's trickier with institutions. I mean, I work at a seminary where our student body just runs the gamut theologically, politically. We have not like the widest range probably, but we have a pretty wide range, a wider than usual, I think, in terms of people rubbing shoulders. And the thing that I think the challenges of that are obvious. And in some ways, it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to be in a classroom with people who have really different ideas about God or really different ideas about government than you. But I also think, I mean, one of the things, and this is related to the theme of your book, that's why I wonder what you think about it. One of the things that can happen is people can be changed through those kind of encounters, and over the course of time, I think Princeton Seminary has been a place where people, for example, who were had a very conservative or traditional view on homosexuality come here and they study alongside gay and trans students, and they leave oftentimes with a different point of view. But there's a lot of, I mean, it's a challenging thing to do too, and to host that kind of like proximity and relationship between people who have deep disagreements. I mean, is that something that we need to be fighting to keep up going in our society and different kinds of colleges, universities, churches, whatnot? Or do you see this more as a project that kind of charismatic individuals can mainly carry?
I actually think, and this may sound counterintuitive, I think we may need to do less talking to heal the country and more shared doing. I think we need to like paint certain walls together and like recarpet community centers in Indiana together and deal with the algae issue in our lake on Zooms on Saturday morning together, to just rebuild basic kind of ligaments of trust in the society. And I think sometimes there's too much effort spent on like getting us to heal and talk about our differences. I heard someone say the other day about a family that they've always been good at having differences but being friendly. I think, I don't know that what we need right now is to litigate these issues. I'm talking about in kind of citizen to citizen. I think we just need to be in touch with each other. We need to fight the great sort. I think we need to fight the separation. And I think healing and dialogue and persuasion and will all come on top of that. But right now, increasingly, we're not in relationship anymore. Like we're not connected. And I think that in some ways is a bigger problem for me than us having differences. Differences are fine. Differences are wellspring of politics.
Mm.
I think if we don't know each other anymore,
Yeah,
it becomes very, very hard to move forward together.
Yeah, yeah. So I wonder, I mean, I think, and I hope a lot of the folks listening will, read this book and find it as persuasive as I have. I wonder, what you think about, I mean, at the end of the day, you're arguing this and the kind of fundamental justification for this work that you're calling folks to take up is that it's important for building the world that we hope to see. You quote Alicia Garza as saying, we can keep talking to each other and becoming a narrower and narrower slice of this country, or we can actually fight for power. And I take it toward building that more beautiful world. I wonder if, sort of in closing, you have any words of, for folks who are just going about their everyday lives, if they were to take your book seriously, if they were really to say, hey, I want to be a part of this thing. What does that look like for ordinary folks who are, raising their kids and going to work and everything? What does this actually look like? How would you encourage them? What advice would you give for them in terms of like cultivating the kind of culture of persuasion that might eventually deliver the world we hope for?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to ask that, because this is in some ways a book about what our political movements can do differently to fight for the kind of world we deserve and the nice things we deserve. But it's also a book about what regular people can do. People listening to this will have relatives who've succumbed to QAnon. People listening to this will have, Thanksgiving dinners that have gone awry, and another one that may be going awry in 2 weeks from now. People listening to this will have, these political cleavages within their workplace, within their communities, will be feeling that they're no longer able to get things, done in their community. And excuse me, I think what I try to advocate for people is to learn from these kind of master persuaders who I write about in the book, about things you can do very much in your own life to try to respectfully, strategically win over those people in your life, and do so in a way that does not compromise on what you believe, but that actually is about standing firmly and bravely in your truth, but also reaching out much more effectively. And I think there's ways to talk to the QAnon uncle that drive him deeper down the rabbit hole, and there's ways that actually pull him out. And I write about some of the people who have better strategies. There's ways to talk to folks who are, voting for Donald Trump and his values right now and his candidates. And there's ways to talk to them that drive them further into that world. And there's ways that shake their confidence in their own, certainty and help deliver victories for the other side. So this is a book about how to, in a way, think about people on the other side as fundamentally complicated, as Beyonce says in her new album, as contradicted, and how to, with that understanding, reach them, appeal to them, play up that source of dissonance within them with the other thing they also think. And it's very much, I think, a book that all people can relate to and apply in their own lives.
I mean, the thing I love, and I really thank you for your time and for this book. I think, in the last 5 or 6 years, amid kind of all the turmoil that we've experienced, I think it's easy as a person on the ground to feel just overwhelmed and like, what can I really do? Congress is a mess and Washington's been a mess, and what can I do? But I mean, I think you have in the book really outlined a kind of ambitious agenda that is something that everyone can participate in. And it's partly about creating a kind of an optimistic, ambitious agenda for convincing folks of what the beautiful future for our democracy might look like, that we can all be a part of that. So thank you so much again for your time.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate this conversation.